real quick. Okay, so we need to make one addendum to this tutorial, and that is how do we change our camera position, right? We've got the camera as a child of our player. We currently don't have any player, but any object that's visible, which we're going to change in a second. But what would be nice is if we could switch between first person and third person view of our character. Sometimes you want to be able to see the character. Certain mechanics and stuff would require that. So whether or not you're always in third person or you're always in first person, or you want your player to be able to switch between the two, allow is going to be something that we can do pretty easily with our scene. So let's go ahead and get started with this. So we're going to select our player. This won't really matter, but we're going to select our player, and we're going to create a cube as like a visible object that is going to be our player. And the reason we're doing a cube is because if I make it a little bit longer, then you can kind of clearly see the direction that it's facing. Whereas when I was trying to use a sphere or a capsule or other things, you couldn't really tell what direction it was headed. So we're going to use a cube, and we're going to, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our cube and we're going to make it a child of the player. I'm going to put it under the camera, but I don't want it to be a child of the camera. Right, so it should be a sibling of our camera. And once I've done that, you'll see that my position in the Y direction for this cube is -1. I'm going to go ahead and set that to 0. And you'll note that when I set it to 0, it's actually 1 unit off the ground. And that's because our player is a unit tall, and it basically is centering our player on the center of, or sorry, it's centering the cube on the center of the player object, right? So, so I'm going to go ahead. So I've got my cube. So let's go ahead and make it in the Z direction. Let's make it 2 units long, right? So this way we can kind of tell which way is facing forward. Also, you'll note that now part of the cube is in the view of the camera. Now, something to note, if your camera is inside, like if I was to manually move this, inside my cube, you'll notice that it disappears, right? And that's because the all we're rendering are the exterior surfaces of an object. So when you're inside an object, it totally disappears because Unity is not seeing that back face, right? And so that's something just to note, right? If you're like, why can't I see my character through my camera? It's because you need to position your camera a little bit differently to make sure that it's visible. So I'm going to make sure I undo that. So it's at Y is at 0.75. So how do I do this? So first, we need to select our camera because that's what we're going to be moving. We've already done our camera x-axis rotation. So go ahead and group that, and then we're going to start working below that. And the first thing we're going to need is a trigger that's going to make that change happen. And so I'm just going to use the on keyboard input event trigger, and we'll set it to Q. So I'm going to type on key, select on keyboard input. I'm going to zoom in so we can see. I'm going to click on the space, the key menu here. And if I hit the letter Q, it should pop me down to Q, and then I can select it. If that doesn't work, just go ahead and navigate to it and select it. And the reason I chose Q is because WASD we're using all the time, and maybe we're going to want to switch cameras frequently. So Q seems like an okay choice. So then what we need to do is we need a way to toggle things on and off. Now, up until this point, we haven't really used toggles. We've either set something or unset something. So I'm going to go ahead and click Add Unit. And I'm going to go down to Control. And I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. The very last option down here is Toggle Value. Right, toggle flow is going to turn flows on and off. That's not really what we want. We want to be able to switch a value. In this case, we're going to have a vector 3 for our first person position and a vector 3 for our third person camera position. So I'm going to say toggle value, and I'm going to go ahead and rather than have this go into on, I want my flow to go to toggle. And you'll note that it's checked marked to start with the on value. And so for our on value, we are going to have that set to whatever our default position is. And then our off value will be our third person position. So to make this easy, we're going to create a couple variables to hold those values. And the way that this works is, right, we can toggle it, which is either going to turn it on or off. Basically, if it gets flow, it turns on. Well, and it's on, it turns off. If it gets flow when it's off, it turns on. Right? And so it'll either send the on value or the off value. So what I need to do is I need to create a couple object variables. So I'm going to select the object tab. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to type first person. I'm going to hit plus, and I want to set the type of that to vector3. If for some reason vector3 doesn't show up as one of your options, just go ahead and type in vector and it should pop up right away. So I'm going to say vector3. And what I want to give this a default value. Specifically, right, in my position, here I've got x is 0, y is 0.75, and z is 0. So I'm going to say 0.75. Okay. Now I need to create a third person variable as well. So I'm going to say third, capital P person. And I'm going to create that. I'm going to come down. I'm going to say, let's make this a vector3 as well. And now I'm going to set the values that I want my camera to be at. So for third person, I'm going to want my camera to be a little bit higher. So I'm going to say 2 as my y height. And z is going to be -5, so it's back behind the character a bit. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just pull both of these variables down in here. And so I'll connect the first person into the on value and the third person into the off value. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and work on the other side of this. So the value coming out is going to be, we're just going to feed it straight in. This is going to, right now what's going to happen is this is going to snap to the, we're going to snap our position. So if I go here and I click add unit, and in the past, whenever we've wanted to change the position, we've said transform.position set, which is exactly what we're going to do right now. And then we're going to see why this is not what we want to do. But let's go ahead and connect our value. And then we need to have the flow from turned on going here and the flow from turned off going here, right? Because no matter what, whether it's turned on or off, we want to be able to update this unit. Because the off and on is basically saying first person or third person, first person or third person. So let's go ahead and see if this works. Okay, so if I'm sitting here at 0 and I hit the letter Q, I pop back to where I would expect to pop. If I hit the letter Q again, I pop into a slightly different place. You'll notice my position is kind of off in my inspector. And so that's odd. So if I hit Q again, I pop back. You know, rotation still works. The camera is rotating with the object like it's supposed to. If I hit Q, I pop forward, and again, I'm not quite where I thought I would be. If I go, let's go ahead and move around the scene a little bit and see what happens. So if I move forward several units and hit Q, it pops me way back behind the object. And if I hit Q again, it drops me closer to the object, but I'm still not where I think I'm going to be. So what's going on? You may have guessed it already, but if not, when we use the transform position unit, it's setting our position in the world, right? And so it's not setting our position relative to our player or relative to our parent object. It's setting our position relative to the whole scene. And so that means that we are, you know, whatever in world space is, you know, whatever location we're at is where we're getting sent to. So we need to change our graph a little bit by using a different option, right? In other examples we've set our or gotten our local rotation. In this case, we need to use local position. So if I right click and say add unit and type in transform.local, you'll see that I have local scale, and I also have the ability to set my local position. Right, so local position means that it's going to be set relative to whatever object is my parent object. So I'm going to be moving, rather than setting it in world space, it's going to be set, you know, 0.75 units up from the center of the player. or it'll be set 5 units back from the player and 2 units up, right? So let's go ahead and make that change. So I'm just going to connect those two here. I'm going to connect this one here. I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to just delete this unit. So let's go ahead and try this now. Okay, so now I can, right, I'm going back to where I started at. Like I can see the same amount of cube in the scene, and I can pop back to a more third-person view. If I move around a bit in the scene and hit Q, I pop back to the same distance behind the object and to the same distance in front of the object. So fantastic. And you'll note, because I'm so close to the camera there, part of my character disappears, which, you know, is fine for now. Right, so this now works, right? Local position is the one that we want so that we aren't resetting ourselves back to wherever we spawned, right? That would not, the camera to wherever we spawned, which, you know, who knows, maybe that's some sort of thing. So, and our cube can jump and fly around this empty grid-like desert. Okay, so, right, we're doing, this is a snap. There's one last thing I might want to try out, which is to do a LERP, or a linear interpolation between where we are and where we want to be. Okay, so we've got this set up so that we can switch between the two views. Now, what if we want to have a smooth transition from one view to the next? That's something in order to do that, we're going to need to do something called linear interpolation, which is really hard for me to say for some reason. But what that means is that linear interpolation means that we know where we are and we know where we want to be, and we're going to move at a uniform number of units each frame in order to get from one location to the next. And so we can't do that with just this on-keyboard input here because it's a singular event, and the way we have this toggle set up, things aren't quite the way that we want them to be. So let's go ahead and start making some changes that are going to allow us to do this. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to change a couple of events here. So let's go ahead and copy this because we're just going to make a copy and then we'll break this one so they're not both running at the same time. But we're going to need our on-keyboard input, right? We want to know if we hit Q, something's going to happen. But instead of toggling a value, what we want to toggle is our flow. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click. I'm going to say Add Unit. I'm going to say Toggle. And down here is Toggle Flow. And this, right, is somewhat confusing when we get started because there's lots of, oops, leave that check mark. There's lots of potential inputs here in terms of where do I put the flow. Because we're wanting to toggle this and we're not sending different events in to have it either be on or off, we're using the same keyboard input to toggle it on and off. We just want to connect to toggle. And then one of the other things we're going to need to do, because linear interpolation takes place over time, we're going to want to make this a coroutine because we're going to be using a timer. And so I'm going to go ahead and select this unit, checkmark coroutine, and then let's go ahead and continue. And so then the outputs are also different, right? What we really want is we just want to know when it's turned on and when it's turned off. We don't need to have flow coming out when it's on or flow coming out when it's off. You can imagine, right, you might want to toggle where, say, you know, you want some action to continue happening while this toggle is on, and you want it to stop when it's off. In our case, we just want to send a pulse out when it gets turned on and a pulse out when it gets turned off. And so to do that, and then we also are going to want to use this true or false value, whether or not it's on. So the first thing we're going to do from here is we need to have a branch, because we want to, right, we have to either go from first person to third person or from third person to first person. So I'm just going to go to Control and Branch. And I actually want turned on and turned off to flow into my branch. But then what I'm going to do is to make that determination, which is which, this is on allows me to do that. So if it's on, I'm going to get a true. And if it's actually been toggled off, it's going to send out a pulse through the false branch. Okay, so let's start with the true branch. It doesn't matter whether true or false is first person to third person or whatever. We're going to start with it, since we're going to say start on, and we're going to be toggling to off, then we should probably, well, let's just go ahead and make one on a branch and we'll figure out. We'll switch the start state when we figure out which way we want to go. Okay, so we're going to need a timer, right? So I'm going to say add unit timer. And I'm going to try and select the timer. There we go. It just didn't update. And so if this is true, I want this to start my timer, right? We are going to be, once we get all of this together, we'll actually just copy it and paste the entire chain of things over for the false branch and make a couple modifications. I'm going to leave the duration set to 1 second. And now what we need to do is we need to do create the units that will have this action happen. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click add unit, and I'm going to type in LERP and LERP, and specifically I want the vector 3 LERP, because we're going to be taking our current position and changing it to another position. And the way LERP works is that A is basically your current location, and B is the location that you want to go to, or the target. And then T is where it's basically between 0 and 1 is a value it's a value from here to here between 0 and 1, right? So we want this value to be able to change over time. So as time goes through, as this timer gets closer to completion, we want to get closer and closer to B. So to start with, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have tick attached here so that every time our timer ticks, it's going to update our position a little bit towards B. And then the value that I want in here, right? I said it's a value between 0 and 1 is what we're interested in here. So that means I want this elapsed percent. I could also use remaining percent, but that's going to go backwards, and we don't really want to do that. I mean, honestly, we could potentially use both, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to use elapsed. And then we need our 2 vectors, right? And so if this is true, right, we're starting out here. And if this is true, let's go ahead and toggle our start on. Let's just toggle that to off so we can use true as starting in first person and moving to third person. Then I'm going to go to my object variables over here, and I'm going to grab first person and drag it in here. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to try it again. And again, and again, and again, and again. There we go. I don't know why that's so fussy, but it is. So first person is going to be A. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this and switch first person on the pasted one to third person, and then connect this to B. Okay, so we've got LERP set, but now what we need to do is we need to translate this to a change in our position. So let's right click, and we're going to say transform.position. And we don't actually want position, right? We want transform.local position. So if I say local position set, then I'm going to go ahead and feed my flow in here and feed this vector 3 in there. Now, I'm going to go ahead, let's go ahead and do both branches because that'll make it just a lot easier to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these units from my timer to my 2 variables to LERP and all that. I'm going to hit copy. I'm going to paste them. And then I am going to drag these down so they're not overlapping the other units. I'm going to take my false. I'm going to bring this down to the toggle. So those are connected. And then I'm going to switch first person here to third person and third person there to first person. So I'm going to say third person, and first person. Right, so now it's good on this branch, it'll be in third person and it'll move to first person. Okay, so we've done those things. Now, if you still have your keyboard input up here connected, just disconnect this branch, disconnect this flow so that nothing happens in there, right? I want you to be able to leave that there, so if you want to be able to just have it switching, you can. But so now we've got this branch set, and I just want to make sure I didn't leave anything on down here. Perfect, that's off. Okay. So let's go ahead and see what happens. Okay, so I can rotate my view around. If I hit Q, right? Okay, so maybe I started in the wrong direction, but that's fine. But now it should be fine. So, right, so I hit Q, I fly back out, Q, I fly in, Q, I fly out, Q, I fly in, etc. So if I go ahead and stop this from playing, and I uncheck start on, then I should start, when I click Q, I should be able to fly out to third person. There we go. So now there's not that hiccup where I start at third person and jump in. So there we go. All right, so we've got this set. Now, this is, right, linear motion. It's very smooth, but sometimes for a little bit of flourish, it might be nice to have that motion not be quite linear, right, in the sense that you kind of speed up or slow down a little bit as you get closer to the target. So the way we do that is pretty simple. You know, it's basically we can take the time that we've got, square it, do a couple of things to it, and then feed it back in here, and it's going to adjust the rate. And so we're going to use a formula to do that. And I'm not going to necessarily explain all the steps in the formula, but let's go ahead and make it. And then this is something that you can reuse if you're doing other motion where you want it to not be linear. So we have one input in here, and we're just going to say A times, oops, I don't know why that got angry. A times A times, right? So that's the squaring, right? A times A. And then there's a strange little bit in here where you take 3.0 and you subtract 2.0 times A. And note, I'm going to zoom in as much as I can so you can see this. Note that there are parentheses around the 3.0 minus 2.0 times A. This is just a really standard formula that allows us to have our time not be linear, right? So well, time is linear, I guess, but the rate at which the rate of change over this range, it adjusts it a little bit so that you'll kind of see the output when we plug this in. And so all we do is we just take this and sort of insert it in here. And if I zoom out, sorry, and I only did this on one side so that we can kind of, so you can kind of see the difference. And you might not even notice, you know, a major difference, but let's go ahead and see what we get. Okay, so right, everything's good still. If I hit Q, right, that's the linear branch. This is the non-linear branch, right? You can kind of see it kind of accelerates away more quickly. So let's go ahead and put that in on our other side as well. And it's just like, it just gives it a little bit more like kind of cooler feel. I don't know how else to describe it than it's just it's called smooth step, but it's just like a little, it kind of gently increments how quickly the motion goes. So we're just going to go ahead and replace this one and go ahead and run this again. Okay, so right, so now we can have this kind of smoothing motion as it goes through, and it just feels more natural. It feels like something that would happen in the real world. And so now our players can run around. They can, even in the mid jump, they can change view from their cameras, right? This could be something that's a mechanic as well, right? If you get a speed up, you're generally driving like this, but you get a speed boost and your character moves forward, or who knows why you would want to do that. But right, so there we go. We have got camera changing and all the motion that we need.